Thanks. Everybody, we're about a minute after 1, although there are quite a few board members still to arrive. But maybe what we could do is this. I didn't leave a lot of time for introductions, and I know that the group has met for the orientation, and many of you were at the trade show. But if board members can put their names in the chat and what seat you are representing, that would be helpful.
I am slowly renaming board members with the @ symbol in front of their name. That should bring you to the top of our list for our meetings. Thanks.
Thank you.
And we have Beth Valentine queued up fairly soon to enter. She's not on yet, which is fine.
Yeah, she indicated she might not be here a lot before 1:30 when we're scheduled for her to go. Well, I'm going to dive in. I think we have a critical mass of board members. I didn't put my name and role in the chat, so I guess I should do that. I'm Craig Lapine. I am the director of the Bureau of Agriculture, Food and Rural Resources at the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry. And welcome everybody to the first official meeting of the advisory board of the Maine Agriculture, Food and Forest Products Infrastructure Fund. I'm just going to put out a pet peeve at the moment. So the statute itself is inconsistent with what this is an infrastructure fund, an infrastructure investment fund, an investment fund. So maybe one thing we can do at a subsequent meeting is come up with a name for this fund that is consistent and call it maybe something a little bit more catchy than AFTIF, which is what I've been calling it. Anyway, so I'm going to start a bit of a slideshow just to orient everybody as to what we're up to today. So here we are. It is the first meeting of the advisory board to the Agriculture, Food and Forest Products Infrastructure Fund. And here is what we are going to, what we're trying to get done today. We're going to elect co-chairs. And so soon, I think staff at the department will be stepping out of the chair that I'm in now and board members themselves will be running these meetings. We're going to look at and perhaps adopt, perhaps amend some working agreements to guide the work of this board. I was then going to go through the statute just to make sure we're all on the same page. This won't take probably more than 6 or 7 minutes, but we are functioning under, a statutory mandate. And just to get us all on the same page, I was going to quickly go through that again. And we're then going to pivot, and the department has been through a similar process with a PFAS fund recently. And so I've invited the director of that fund, Beth Valentine, to present on their experience that perhaps we can learn from. And we're going to look at an initial work plan and timeline, and then there'll be an opportunity for public input. So here's an agenda that just sort of recaps what I have said with a couple more additions that don't necessarily tie to objectives. But I did mention, and it's the second to last bullet, public comment. If we seem to have many people more than board members here. If you are thinking that you are going to want an opportunity to offer public comment, maybe if you could let us know that in the chat. You may not know that at this point, but we've only allocated 5 minutes for that because it is our first meeting. And if we need to adjust that and allow for more time, it would be helpful to know in advance. So again, if people could introduce themselves in the chat, that would be helpful. So I'm going to stop sharing because this was not actually the next thing. So the first order of business, sorry, I've got to figure out how to get my view under control here. First order of business is to elect co-chairs. The statute, and we'll be going into the statute in more detail in a bit, but it does allow for the board to elect chairs and to create subcommittees. And 2 people have helpfully raised their hands and have volunteered when I asked, quite honestly, to say, would you be willing to serve that role? So it is ultimately your decision. So if there's anybody else that would like to be considered, please do. But Senator Craig Hickman, and I will continue to call him Senator Hickman, although he's not here as a senator. He's here as a farmer. Senator Hickman is one of those people, and Tricia Rollo of Maine Farmland Trust is the other one. And I was hoping perhaps each of you could just introduce yourselves briefly, and if you have anything to say about your experience in these roles before or your vision for the board, that would be helpful, but not mandatory. Senator Hickman, did you want to go first?
Thank you, Director. For those who don't know me, I'm Craig Hickman. I'm an organic farmer. I own Annabessa Cook Farm in Winthrop. With my husband, we are a small, diversified organic farm. We raise mostly vegetables, but we also raise eggs and poultry. We used to have a micro dairy. We don't any longer. I am serving in my 7th term in the Maine legislature. I have served on the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee, I think for 4 of those 7 terms. I'm currently the chair of the Veterans Legal Affairs Committee and the chair of the Government Oversight Committee. I was very honored to be asked to be a part of this board, knowing that we are about to design something that I believe is very important for the future of keeping especially our small farmers and our small food producers in Maine viable, for increasing food self-sufficiency for the people of the state, for increasing food sovereignty, for increasing institutional food buying. It's all connected in my mind. Some of you may know that I drafted the food sovereignty law, co-drafted the right to food constitutional amendment. And I think that as a person who has facilitated lots of conversations of people with various ideologies and disagreements across the work I've done in the legislature, that facilitating meetings as chair is something that I feel very comfortable doing and would like to provide those services for this board as we design a program that will be beneficial to all the people of the state of Maine. So thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to do the work.
Thank you. Trish?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Tricia Rouleau. I'm the Farm Network Director at Maine Farmland Trust, where I help oversee our farmer support programs, including climate resilience, farm business planning, succession planning, and PFAS support for farmers. I also co-administer a PFAS emergency relief fund along with our partners at MAFCA. I'm looking forward, speaking of PFAS, to our discussion today around the planning process for the state's PFAS Fund. I see that as a really great example of this sort of decision-making process. I participated in one of the subcommittees during that process. And I'm also looking forward to learning from the diverse expertise in this group as we work together to create a plan that supports the goals of this fund. So thank you for your consideration.
You and Tom, Krista West needs an ampersand before her name. She's a board member. So I guess what I would say is I would enter, as long as I'm still holding the gavel, at least momentarily. I would entertain a motion for chairs, a chair or chairs, and that motion can be from the folks who've already raised their hand, or if somebody, I mean, not from them, but of them, or if somebody else would like to also be nominated, you can speak up too. So do I have any nominations?
I'd like to make a motion to nominate Senator Hickman as chair.
I'll second.
Well, I guess we could do these as separate motions, and if we want to have a co-chair, I'll entertain that motion second. So of all those, I think everybody who is a member is on my first screen, and perhaps everybody but Dana is actually on camera. So maybe we can do this with a show of hands, and Dana, you can let us know through the chat or somehow, or unmute. But all those in favor of Senator Hickman serving as a board chair? I'd say that carries, and Dana, you can let us know in a little bit. And then do I have any other motions for a co-chair?
I would make a motion to have Tricia as our co-chair.
And I would second that as well.
Any discussion? All in favor?
I would just note for the record that we've observed that a majority of board members have voted in the affirmative for both.
Thank you. Okay, I did share with Senator Hickman and Tricia last night that I wasn't going to then immediately throw them into the deep end and make them oversee an agenda that they hadn't been a part of developing. So I will continue to steer for now, but thank you both for your willingness to serve. So the next order of business is
Thank you all.
Thank you. And Jody, we didn't discuss this, but I did put these on a slide. Would you want to walk through these agreements? I can as well. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again. And this is, the department has done this before. I'm sure many of you have been through processes like this before. And it is sometimes helpful to have, rules of the road. And so these were some draft working agreements. I'll turn it over to you, Jody.
Sure. Thank you. So nice to see everyone. For those I haven't met before, I also serve in in the department, in the commissioner's office, and have been facilitating various working groups for the department over the last couple of years. These may be familiar to some of you who have been participating in some of those other groups. It's a starting point. It's not necessarily an ending point if any of these don't feel right to you or you feel like something's missing. But I do find that for the benefit of the co-chairs now to have some sideboards for reminding folks about how communications will happen and just sort of the tenor of the conversation, just to keep it in good spirits, productive, and well organized. Oftentimes these are seen as helpful. So just quickly running through them, that we're going to be very intentional about starting and ending meetings on time. You're all busy, and we won't go over that time, so you can reliably schedule meetings immediately after these. We are going to talk a little bit later about the frequency with which you would like to meet in person, recognizing that there is some benefit when you're dealing with kind of, complicated issues or to have that face-to-face communication and realize that we are all human. But to the extent that you can do that when the meetings happen scheduled in person, that would be preferable. There will always be an option to hold meetings to connect online because we know that life intervenes. And in those cases, we ask wherever possible if you could have your screens on so that, again, we see you, you see us, and it just facilitates communication. From a staffing perspective, to support the co-chairs, we're going to make sure that materials are advanced to you. I think technically it must be 10 days. We will absolutely do our best to do that. Sometimes when there's a weekend that falls in there, it gets a little bit more challenging, but our goal is to get you meeting materials 10 days in advance of every meeting. And our hope then is that it gives you and you devote the time to really review the materials. So we're not spending time in the meetings reviewing the materials that you received in advance. We're going to assume that you came prepared and you're ready to jump in. And we just ask you to be here when you're here and really be involved. So you may have multiple screens, you may have multiple cell phones, but we ask for the time that you're together to actually have it be productive time. This next one of striving for equal airtime and enabling all to participate fully. My work has shown me that some people are external processors and you need to say everything in order to come up with what you really think. And other people are a lot more quiet, but with only 1.5, maybe a little bit longer, if you decide to extend meeting times at the end of this meeting, we'll talk about that. But we don't have a lot of time together. So if you could commit to being conscious of the amount of time that you're taking up and helping others to participate fully by encouraging that and not taking up more time than I'd say your fair share, if you will. The next one is really about knowing that you all have been selected to this committee because of areas of expertise and interest, and that you probably feel really strongly about the areas that you represent. And our hope is that you listen with an openness to other people's priorities and concerns and ideas. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to sometime later this year, we'll talk about a work plan later on today, is a framework for funding projects. And so we are trying to adopt a problem-solving orientation so that we can get to a structure for the fund that actually enables us to begin making funding decisions. Where there is disagreement, making a commitment to speaking kindly to one another in the process and not avoiding conflicts or differences of opinion, but expressing those in a respectful way. And then finally, I always put in here that it's okay to have fun. It's not unprofessional. And to the extent that we can add humor into this whole process, I think it becomes more enjoyable. The last thing I'll note is, and I just put this down here as a starting point in terms of how decisions would get made. It struck me that there is kind of a differentiation point between when you're figuring things out and you're coming up with the way in which the fund should be structured. And that to me didn't strike me that, a formal vote on decisions at meetings was really productive or necessary during those times, but that eventually you're going to get to a point where you have a structured fund, you are going to be making funding decisions. And in my experience, in most any of the boards that I'm aware of, when it reaches that point, you do sort of shift to a more formal voting process. So I'm going to stop talking, but keep those working agreements up there and just get reactions, questions, things you don't like, things you'd like to see changed, or things you'd like to see added. And maybe you could just raise your hand in so that I can see who's wanting to weigh in. Actually, yeah, you have in your meeting packet that you received in advance, you received these as well. So maybe it's better to see one another. Any reactions to those things you'd like to see changed? You love them. All right, then I'm going to take that as an endorsement that we'll move that from draft into final form, and we'll use those moving ahead, and we'll include that in each of the meeting packets just as a reminder.
Great. Well, thank you. And this is your board. I think all these decisions could be revisited in the future, but let's use those as the rules of the road until we hear differently. I wanted to acknowledge that Commissioner Beal very much wanted to be here today, and it is also, as Senator Hickman and others on this call are well aware, budget time at the State House, and the department had a hearing yesterday, and we are furiously answering questions that came up in that hearing so we can go back tomorrow with the answers. So she really regretted not being able to be here. I do see, and I don't want to ambush her, but Commissioner Johnson, who is also is graciously joined us in her last hours, I think, as a commissioner, is here. And if you no pressure, but if you would like to say anything, Commissioner Johnson, please do. And at any point, I guess I would say. Okay, I'm going to go back to, so the next thing on the agenda is a review of the statute. And we covered this a little bit in the orientation, but again, we are working under a statutory mandate, so it's probably not a bad idea if we all recognize and agree what it is that we're supposed to be doing here and under what authority we are working. So if you want to go to Maine Code, this is in Title 7, it's Section 320, and the statute is in 3 parts, 320A, B, and C, and I'm going to go through them one at a time. 320A presents specific definitions of terms which are helpful to know. When it talks about infrastructure, what do we mean by infrastructure and things like that. And it also sets out the goals of this program, of which the fund is the main but not the sole instrument, but of this program that's defined in section 320. What are the goals? It is to strengthen the state's economy, always with an eye on inclusivity, to expand infrastructure investment. And this concept of collaborating, and the reason that Commissioner Johnson and her successor will be on this board is because DECD is specifically named as a collaborator. But it's a concept that comes up again and again in the statute, and I think it's good for members to remember that this fund, while the department, I dare say, sees this as becoming our flagship instrument for providing financial support to food and forest products businesses, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And that it is incumbent upon us to know what the rest of the landscape is, and where we might fit in, and rely on partners or on collaborations when possible. So those are the big goals: strengthen the economy while being inclusive, make infrastructure investments, and do that when possible in collaboration. 320B establishes the fund, which is to carry out the purposes of this chapter. Again, I said the chapter it's not just the fund, although it is mainly the fund. And 320B points to 320C, which is you all, that this is going to be directed by an advisory board that shall oversee and determine expenditures from the fund. So 320C is the longest, and I will encourage you to go read it. It was too long to put on a slide. But what it speaks to is the makeup and the powers and the duties of this board. So in terms of the makeup, and I'm going to touch on a point that Jody just made. I think everybody knows this. So you can look at your appointment letter if you're not clear, and I'm certainly happy to provide this. But there are 17 named kind of functions that are filled by that we went out and recruited people who meet that criteria. And in many cases, you are the only person who represents that role. I think there are 2 seats where there are 2 members identified, and other than that, they're sort of one-off. So you are all here because of your unique role in the food, farm, and forestry ecosystem. And just to revisit again what Jody said, I think it's our hope and expectation that you speak to and from that perspective passionately and unabashedly, while also recognizing that there are 16 other equally valid, distinct perspectives around the table. And both of those, honoring both sides of that equation are important. But you have been recruited and nominated and have agreed to serve because of the seat you hold in this world that we're in. And so please bring that experience to the table. When it says that it's going to be up to you to determine the processes, that's things like, are we going to issue RFPs? Are we going to just have, what exactly are we doing here, and how are we going to go about doing that? I'm going to come back to that point in a moment. The statute also says that the board can decide to contract out services, so that, and I take that to mean that grants aren't the only tool here. If the board, after its study and the research that we provide and your deliberations, decide, for example, that there is some priority industry or need, and that could best be addressed not by doing a competitive grant, but by offering a contract to someone to do something. That's another way to work. For example, for the functions named in the contract or in the statute are things like business and financial planning, workforce development. So, so grants, I think, are on everybody's mind, but the board can function in other ways and expend funds through different mechanisms. And the other two big responsibilities of the board are to evaluate how the fund is doing. Is it meeting its objectives? And again, it names here again what I mentioned, from 320A, the requirement and the objective of collaborating. Having said all that, I'm going to take a step back to 320A, which the statute puts a lot of power and decision making in the hands of the board, but it does reserve powers to the commissioner. And I like 320AC here, or 320A3C, administering funds, grants, and programs, and hiring staff and contractors. I guess one of the things that I want to flag is that you are not being asked to staff this fund. Your role is really to provide directional advice, and so that there's a level of getting in the weeds that we are not going to ask you to do. And I think that if the board finds itself there, it might be appropriate to be helpful to inappropriate to be helpful to pull back. You are supposed to be big picture. We have many people from the department on the call. We are in the process of hiring dedicated staff. So we're that is not going to be your role. You'll always be, I think, welcome to do things like when we do site visits to grantees or things, but you're not going to have to figure out really the nuts and bolts of how this is all going to work. So I hope that is clear. Oh, and this is actually the next bullet we're coming back to afterward. So any questions about the statute and our charge here before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, then. Well, so the next thing on the agenda is to present an example that the department has recently accomplished. So Beth Valentine is the director of the PFAS Fund. She came onto the staff of the department to do this job. There wasn't a fund beforehand, and she has created something out of nothing, which is what our job is here as well. And so I asked Beth to share some of that experience in the hopes that we might learn from it. So I'll turn it over to you, Beth.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, as Craig mentioned, the PFAS Fund was established by the legislature in 2022 by statute, allocated $60 million and told to spend it in these 4 broad program categories. I have some slides and I will share with you kind of the process we worked through. If I can find the correct document. Let's see. Is that slideshow?
We do seem to see your screen, Beth, but at least for me, it's blank.
Okay, can you see it now?
I cannot.
Cannot.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, it's a little bit of a lag. Okay, so overview of PFAS Fund development. Like I said, established in statute, specific focus on supporting commercial farms impacted by PFAS contamination. The 4 broad categories are financial assistance to impacted producers, land, which encompasses purchasing PFAS impacted property at the fair market value as if it is not contaminated, research, which involves grants to researchers as well as potentially establishing a research station on property acquired by the property, and health, which includes things like access to blood serum testing, mental health support services, and we're also supporting work being done by CDC to address PFAS and health issues. Like you, the department has an advisory committee to advise on the administration of the PFAS Fund. And I'll just kind of walk through the steps. So the groundwork was establishing the statute, hiring the initial staff, which was me. The advisory committee met for the first time in November of 2022. And then we went through a very intensive planning process in the early part of 2023. From January to July, the advisory committee met about 6 times, but we also the advisory committee established 4 subcommittees in each of those program areas. Those committees met 26 times, and they really did the heavy lifting in terms of determining how to spend this fund. Once, so the subcommittees would report back to the full advisory committee. The advisory committee, for the most part, accepted the subcommittee's recommendations. There was, of course, some back and forth. We had 2 public hearings during the course of this planning process to elicit public input, once on like the first complete draft, and then once we had the penultimate version of the implementation plan. Again, we had a public hearing to get feedback on that plan. Following that second public hearing, the advisory committee adopted the plan and recommended that the department begin implementation. So before we could implement the plan, we then had to go through a rulemaking process. The department cannot give money away without having parameters for, who's eligible, who makes the decisions, if there's an appeal, what's the process to be followed. So all that is laid out in rulemaking. Likewise, we needed internal policies that really get into like the nitty gritty of, so for instance, the department since early 2022 has had an income replacement program for PFAS impacted farmers. There was a policy document sort of underlying who's eligible, how payments are calculated, etc. Once the PFAS Fund assumed responsibility for that program, we went through a rulemaking process, but we still have that policy document that gets into the minutia of how do we treat particular types of payments. And also, while the rulemaking was pending, we developed tools to help people access these different programs. So we developed a master application. It is one application for 8 types of financial assistance available both through the PFAS Fund and the PFAS Response Program. We're sister programs. The PFAS Fund is located in the Commissioner's Office. PFAS Response is in the Bureau of Agriculture, Food and Rural Resources. But there's a lot of overlap and sharing of information between the 2 programs. So we have our master application for financial assistance. We have our land purchase inquiry form. We developed a binder of information called the PFAS Response Kit. So this is information about what resources are available from both public and private entities. How do you access those resources? How do you interpret a lab report from if you've had your water, your soil, your milk tested, how do you interpret those results? So this binder is meant to be a reference document. Of course, we updated information on our website. We contracted with the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. They provide people who we've designated as navigators to help impacted producers identify what programs they're eligible for, and then help process, gather the information to submit their applications, etc. So while rulemaking proceeding, this kind of development of the tools was also underway. We began distributing funds in March of 2024, almost a year ago. And so now we are at the review and assessment stage. Annually, we report to the legislature. Some elements of the program are still kind of ramping up, most especially the health initiative. So it's kind of, iterative. We're learning as we're going and refining as we go. As I mentioned, we the PFAS Advisory Committee established 4 subcommittees. The members of the advisory committee members identified the members of the subcommittees, really subject area experts. Each subcommittee had 2 co-chairs. One was from a state of Maine agency. The other co-chair was an outside partner. Each subcommittee had its own mission and scope, but they were similar. They followed the same cadence. So I included examples from the Land Transfer Subcommittee, mission to develop, analyze, and recommend strategies to the PFAS Fund Advisory Committee for the purchase and sale of agricultural land with known PFAS contamination. And then, specific asks that the advisory committee was asking the subcommittee to follow. And then each subcommittee completed, we had this template, a strategy template that we asked each subcommittee to use to guide their conversations and ultimately their recommendations. So here's a blank one. The very first item, identify what purposes listed in statute, if any, that this strategy addresses. So the strategies all relate back to the mission identified in the enabling statute. And then, describe the strategy, who will be eligible, who will benefit and how, will anyone be disadvantaged? And our intention was not to disadvantage anybody. So by asking that question, it prompted us to think, were we being inclusive in our development of this strategy? And so I'm sure Craig will share these slides afterwards. You can see the, the other questions, but that's by having the strategy template, each subcommittee, depending on their scope, kind of the initial charge derived from the statute, they would do more or less. So the research subcommittee, I think they just came up with 3 strategies, whereas the direct financial assistance, they had, 8 or 9. But by using this template, all of the strategies, followed the same flow, and it was, relatively easy to compile them all into a single document that became the plan. That, as I said in the beginning, was shared publicly, revised, shared again, and ultimately became the implementation plan for the PFAS Fund. We used SharePoint to share all these various drafts. The PFAS Fund Advisory Committee had its own SharePoint site, but also it had access to each of the subcommittees' SharePoints. Alternatively, the subcommittee members, if they weren't also an advisory committee member, only had access to their particular subcommittee's site. So meeting agendas, meeting recordings, draft documents, everything was kept here. And we were able to share these sites with partners who were outside of the state of Maine. So people without maine.gov emails could still use this system for sharing documents. And I think that's it. I am happy to answer, more specific questions that you may have.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, and I think our intent here, my intent in inviting Beth was to, sort of present an example of how our work might proceed. So if anybody does have any questions or want to make any comments about that, yeah, go ahead, Matt, and then other folks can just jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Beth, for your presentation. I'm wondering if you started out with a predetermined schedule on when things were supposed to be done. You mentioned the first meeting, November 2022, the plan approved in July of 23, distributing the funds in March of 24. Did that meet a predetermined schedule, or did you kind of progress as things went along?
I think initially I had a self-imposed deadline of having a plan ready So my annual reporting date to the legislature is March 1. I wanted to have something fairly robust to share with them by March 1. But I think I was also a bit naive going into this, thinking that I could have a complete plan in essentially 3 months. The work we did in December of 22 was still, getting everybody grounded. So we were starting, with a shared understanding of our mission, what was possible. So really work began in earnest, and particularly with the subcommittees in January. So I had to revise the timeline as we went on, but even still, from January to July, that was a very intense period of work, but the document now, 2 years later, I refer back to it regularly. I keep the paper copy of the plan on my desk because it is a useful document and keeps the organization moving forward. So, and yes, to answer your question, I had initial benchmarks. They needed to give a little bit. And then once we moved into the rulemaking, that I had less control over that process, and took a long time from the initiation of submitting the draft rules, and then public notice and scheduling. And then you remember last January we had a series of really terrible storms, and both were on dates that I had public hearings scheduled, so that pushed the deadline back.
Thanks. And I guess a follow-on question for Craig. Has the department put together a schedule of deliverables out 2 or 3 years?
Not, oh, am I muted? No. I would say not 2 or 3 years. So Beth referred to rule making. And that is also I would say, or this board's, a very important middle term deliverable that we need to figure out how to get to. So I don't know that this group will decide to do a plan in exactly the same way, but I do think that decisions need to be made about the priorities of the fund and the instruments that it is going to use to achieve those priorities. Staff can't then take that, go into rulemaking and try to take those priorities and those instruments and give them the structure that they need. So as Beth alluded, we can legally give out money and do the things that we're supposed to be doing. We're going to need that direction. And I have set the end of September as a target to have that direction from the board so that the staff has what it needs to then go into rulemaking. And then again, as Beth sort of alluded, that process then isn't always as we would like it to flow. I mean, there are twists and turns. So that's the nearest term objective. I would say one thing that is different about the PFAS Fund experience than the AFPIF Fund is that all of the PFAS Fund's money had been appropriated, and then they had to figure out, and there was a real emergency happening on the ground, and they needed to get that money out into the world. I would say this fund is addressing a different kind of emergency. It's perhaps a little bit more slow moving, but we do have an emergency around farm and forestry viability in Maine, and this is trying to address it. And not all of the money that I think most people around this table would hope for has in fact been appropriated. We've got $500,000, much larger fund numbers have been talked about, and different strategies have been discussed about how that pot is going to grow. So no one is looking at this group to say, why aren't you spending the money yet? Exactly, because not all the money, I would say, is there, but we still need to get those priorities and instruments figured out so that we can build that architecture, so that when the money does come, as I am fairly confident it will, we can then be out getting money on the ground. And I did just share, you asked a very short question, I gave a long answer. So I have put, and this is one of my next parts of the agenda, I've put out there as the end of September as a near-term objective to have some of these big decisions made. Jody, I see you've unmuted. Did you want to weigh in? Okay. Other comments, questions? All right, well, Beth, I really appreciate you sharing your experience. It's very helpful. I know I will continue to draw on that expertise, and you've generously said you can be a resource for this group, so thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you being here.
So happy to help, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you. So the PFAS Fund is one example. And Eric, I'm just going to give a heads up. I'm going to introduce you in a moment. So you want to get ready if you're within earshot. So what I see as my job and staff job in the near term is to provide the information, or to provide, not the information, but to provide information and resources that we think will be helpful to you to do your job. And then when you tell us what different resources and information you need, to be responsive to that, and to keep the process moving forward. So the experience that the department has, including the recent experience around the PFAS Fund, is one source of information that may serve the process here. There are others. We've been doing other staff-based work internally to generate the information we think you're going to need. But there's another resource, and I want to introduce one of the principals right now. So Erica Campbell is the principal at In Common Group, a consulting firm. We have, as may have alluded in the past, because not all of the funding for this program has been appropriated, we have been in partnership with CEI. And Amy, Amy, is that your hand up? So no, that's just my cursor in a hand shape. Amy Winston, who's a board member, is from CEI, but we've been in partnership with them because they went out and got some federal money so that we can jumpstart this process, get a staff member, and bring in consultants to try to answer some of the big questions that we are facing. So I just wanted to give Erica a little bit of airtime if she wanted to introduce herself. She's not really on today's agenda, but she will be on future agendas and is going to be one of our resources.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and it's great to be here. As Craig said, I'm supporting the work of some background research that will hopefully be useful to you all as you develop this fund. I'm from Vermont and have been part of the food system there for a long time, and have had the fortunate opportunity to collaborate a little bit over the years with folks from Maine. But just in a nutshell, what we are doing is kind of a few different steps of research that will hopefully be really useful. And we look forward to engaging the board in this. The first step is really to just look at the existing resources that Maine already has. We have a sort of an existing resources report that we've drafted that kind of looks at the landscape of funding and technical assistance available to Maine food, farm, forestry, fishery sectors, as well as nonprofits. So both, it's a little more heavily focused on resources for businesses, but we have been analyzing that, looking at what's available, what kind of tools are available, and sort of just explaining the different types of financing and technical assistance tools. We were going to be conducting a lot of interviews, but because the work that Jody did like, I think it was in 2022, she had started this great landscape assessment that we've built off of, and she conducted about 28 interviews, which were very rich with information across both from technical assistance providers and funders, experts and associations, but lots of producers and loggers and forestry business folks. So we are currently analyzing that data and summarizing it. And so that will be, I think, really useful for, just guidance and direction for you all. And then I think we're also going to do a short survey of those folks, different TA providers and financing folks, and as well as sort of an open-ended short survey for producers. I know producers are often over-surveyed, but it'll be a short kind of survey so folks can weigh in. So again, we really look forward to just collaboratively working with you. Oh, the other big piece that we're doing is benchmarking 3 other states that have statewide funds that are led by agencies. So we've been looking at Massachusetts, Michigan, and Vermont. And so they all have state-run funds for farm, food, and forestry sectors. And then they have sort of this collaborative ecosystem of funding and finance and technical assistance networks that they partner with on these funds. So hopefully this will be all really useful to you, and we'll engage more in future meetings.
Thank you, Erica. Anybody have any questions for her or for me? Go ahead, Marana.
Hey, Erica, thank you for that. I was just curious, how long you've been working on this? Like when did you start on it?
So we started last December, and the grant it's a federal healthy food finance initiative and healthy food and financing initiative grant, excuse me, that through CEI. And so, yeah, we started last December. We've been doing sort of this existing resources and analyzing those, and then have been drafting the benchmarking reports from the other states, and then also analyzing those interviews. So I guess we've been about 2.5 months into it. And we are on contract through around the beginning of September. So yeah, just really look forward to engaging with you all and being a resource to you as you develop the fund.
Anybody else? Questions? Okay. Well, thanks. I'm gonna. There is in your board packet. There was a document with the header "Draft Sequence of First 9 AFPIF Board Meetings." You may want to look at that. I've reduced that to a slightly condensed slide, and it's been tweaked a little bit. But I'm going to share that. Yeah, I'd like to share it. But also realize that if we're going to have a conversation, it might be best if I'm not sharing, but I wanted to sort of at least remind people. So we've heard from Beth. um, about their ARC. And we've heard from Erica about some of the resources that are going to be available. And there are others. So this is what we have roughly sketched out. And you will remember that with the exception of today, we've selected the last Wednesday of the month as our meeting time. So roughly speaking, 30,000 feet. Next meeting would be about the existing resources, what is already available to producers here in the state. The next meeting would be about other programs that are not here, but they could serve as examples. And then at which point you will have received quite a bit of information. And then it would be sort of time a little bit to sort of, to begin some decision making, one of which will be, I think, Beth's team group called them subcommittees. I had sort of dubbed them working groups. Do we want to have any working groups in this, and will they meet instead of our planned meetings? Will they meet in addition to? I do know that a lot of folks everybody on this call has got some serious time constraints, but I think we'll need to look at that structure and see if it's what we want to do. Both, do we need the time to do that, and are there voices, is there a level of expertise that we don't have at the table, or is there a specific perspective? Because the legislature, determined the composition of the board, but now you as the board may realize that in order to do our work and make the decisions we need to make, we need additional people. And so these working groups would create a structure where we could bring in and invite people to the conversation, folks with other expertise. We have dedicated June 25th as in lieu, not in lieu of a board meeting, but the substance of that board meeting would be that Erica's team actually wants to use you all as a focus group and hear more about your thoughts on this. July, I think, it's going to be really digging in. That's going to be digging in time. May, June, July are going to be digging in time, and what the structure of that is it going to be plenary? Is it going to be in subgroups or work groups or what have you? By the end of August, I think we would then need to be pulling all of that information back into the big room, and starting to make those big decisions about instruments and priorities, and then really try to drop a gavel on those decisions by the end of September. So that's the arc that I have mapped out, and recognize very firmly that I'm not a decision maker here at all, and I'm not, and what I think of as the arc doesn't have to be the arc, but just, given that I've been thinking about this longer than you all have, and soon that will change and we'll switch places, but just want to know how that looks, and it sort of is one answer to your question, Matt. So I don't know if people have thoughts about that trajectory, reservations about it. Yeah, go ahead, Mara. And I think we're small enough here, people can just jump in. Go ahead, Mara.
Not, it may be tangential a little bit to the trajectory, but it's a question that I have is why did the department feel that you wanted an advisory board to develop this process in the first place? Like why what's the advantage in this process versus you guys just write up a investment program with the expertise already at the department? Just curious. I'm not questioning the decision. I'm
But yeah, no,
happy
I
you
mean,
made it. Just curious.
well, I mean, the short answer is that's what the statute says, and when we follow the law, and the law said, that's the structure. And we also know from experience that there's a lot of, value and richness in bodies like this that can bring these various perspectives. I'll be the first to admit this is not the fastest way to do anything. There's no doubt about that. But I think it can be a really powerful and rich way to do it. And it's what the legislature and the governor agreed was going to be the way.
And then I've never worked in a process like this. Obviously, you can probably tell that. But I'm just curious, is that timetable that you laid out, is that sort of typical for doing this kind of work? Is it longer, shorter, more infrequent, less infrequent? Just curious.
I think it's achievable. I don't want to discourage it. I think it's ambitious, but I think it's achievable, and I think we've seen examples where groups have moved that quickly, and we've certainly seen examples where they haven't. But I think having some milestones to try to meet will be helpful.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, thanks.
Craig, is it assumed that all of these dates will be virtual conversations? Do you think that there'll be times when we meet in person? Did I miss that somewhere in the notes?
That is actually the last agenda item after public comment, where I really think that is for the group to decide. I have an opinion and a model that that we've seen, like the Dairy Task Force recently, the PFAS Fund, where it has felt important to be together in the room at least a handful of times. And also just looking at the screen, I know Shannon is in Presque Isle. I know Jeff is in the Midcoast. I mean, people are not close to Augusta. And so I want to be respectful of that, and also know that it's valuable to be physically together, and that ultimately that's going to be a consensus is going to need to come from the group. And it was, one of the last things we were going to tackle. And I realize also people probably need a little bit longer to have those in-person meetings on their calendar. And if people are coming down, say, from Presque Isle, it probably doesn't make sense to meet just for 90 minutes. We may want to have a longer session at that point.
I wanted to just add maybe not a detail, but a perspective to Murata's question. I think that since one of the goals of this legislative mandate was to develop a program where underserved populations could receive funding, that it was important to have a board that included people who are underserved, not just racially, but demographically in other ways, maybe geographically, maybe by part of the industry, instead of just leaving that all up to the department to design the program. So it was more of we needed to get buy-in from the folks who may represent the kinds of organizations and farms and food producing businesses and even the forest products industry in coming up with the guidelines for the program. And this may be answered in a document, but is this board fully appointed, or are there any vacant positions? I'm just curious. Correct.
There is one vacant position. We had appointed a member from the wood products industry who was appointed and then had to decline. And so I guess I will open that up. I mean, if people know, if people are aware of good candidates there, I mean, Dana, you may particularly be in a position, but anybody may know folks. But yeah, we've got one open seat at the moment.
And also Krista may have some perspective on that as well.
Right, sorry. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
Thanks. I guess I just wanted to, not to belabor it, but I've been fairly involved since early on, and I just wanted to reinforce what Craig said. Well, both Craigs. It is in the statute, and that's for a reason. But as Senator Hickman said, the aim and then the sort of inspirations had been in Vermont. So maybe Erica has thoughts on how stakeholder engagement was really helpful in supporting the goals and the having authentic process in Vermont, and same with Massachusetts. So it seemed like that was an important piece to successfully building something that served the specific populations that it was intended to serve.
Well, all the
I hope that makes
states,
sense.
yeah, and all the states we're benchmarking do have advisory boards with sort of broad diverse representation. And they also have, all three of them have elements of equitable access and underserved producers built into them. They're not necessarily solely about that, but they all have elements of that. And so yeah, that will be reflected in the benchmarking reports.
Okay.
Yeah, great
Yeah,
insight. Thanks.
go ahead. Sorry, Murad, what?
Oh, that was great insight. Thank you guys for sharing that. Makes perfect sense.
Okay, I think we can. Well, I'll ask you, Jody. I mean, do you see am I off course here, or are we ready to perhaps move into some public comment? I do think if we can get to that earlier, actually, I do think maybe this future meeting format conversation could probably benefit from more than the 5 minutes we originally allocated.
Right. The only thing that I would say, but you know, it's been touched on, is that I think that I would really emphasize that work plan flow month to month is really a living document, and it was not developed with the co-chairs input because there weren't yet co-chairs, and so to follow the model of some other processes, generally what I would envision happening is that after each one of the full advisory board meetings, that the co-chairs and DACF staff have a debrief meeting to see, you know, what went well, what did we not cover that we should have, what should we be covering next month? And so we have that scheduled already in anticipation of your next meeting. And I think through that process, things will start to shift. We'll make sure that in each of your meeting packets, we include an agenda, the working agreements, the statute, just so that you're always familiar with that. And then as the timeline gets updated or modified or more nuanced, we can put that in there as well.
Okay, well then maybe it's 2:13. Why don't we go into 5 minutes of public comment, if there is any, and if we need a little bit more, that's fine. But we'd love to get back to the meeting question, you know, perhaps a little bit before 2:25. And so, Tom, well, I'm not sure what will happen if people raise their hands. You'll unmute them, or will they be able to unmute themselves?
They will need to unmute themselves.
Okay.
But raised hand function is helpful. Not seeing anyone requesting.
Yeah. Nor am I. Well, for those of you who are just listening, thanks for joining us then. Okay, so we have not everybody, but we do have most board members here. So let's tackle this question of preferred, preferred formats for meeting. We are currently scheduled for 90-minute meetings once a month on Zoom. What are the other ideas, and how might we, what are other models that we could think about?
Given the geographic dispersity, is that a word, of our board membership, I think that Zoom meetings make a lot of sense. But I do believe that we may want to, and I'll discuss with the co-chair, of course, one or two in-person meetings when we're maybe getting feedback from the working groups so that we can all be together in the same space. It is really important to have in-person meetings to the extent that we are able to schedule those far enough in advance for people to be able to get to wherever those in-person meetings need to be. They don't have to be in Augusta. But I just wanted to put that out there as it's really important for us to get to know each other in the same space as well, so we can do better work.
I would agree with that. I think it would be great to have a couple of opportunities to meet in person. And there could maybe be a potential Zoom option for people who can't make it, but I do think in that scenario, those people attending via Zoom while everyone else is in person are sort of missing out on optimal conversations. So hopefully we can find a way to all be together.
Yeah, for the record, I've lived up here my whole life. I'm used to having to travel down the 95 for everything, so I can do it in my sleep, so it's no problem here.
Don't do it in your sleep.
And then that's so awesome. But also I am near Augusta, so pretty spoiled in that way. But I grew up in the county, so I always like to be the person in the room that says, let's schedule one meeting in the county. I don't know, if you work in Augusta and you haven't been to the county this year, let's go to the county. Come on.
Exactly. I'm all about it, Mariah. Thank
I
you.
realize there's a lot of practical limitations to that, but also for the people that live in the county, that's a 5-hour drive depending on where you live. So the practical limitations are very real, and not for nothing, like a good chunk of our underserved populations for one reason or another live that far away. So let's, if we can, let's.
Yeah, I was gonna
Amen.
prefer to travel. I will happily travel to see more. And I also wondered if the focus group one would be a good in-person meeting too.
That's a good idea.
June 25th.
I was wondering if, and not knowing where everybody lives and works, could we have a bunch of regional in-person meetings? Maybe one in southern Maine, one in central Maine, and one in northern Maine, and then Zoom those meetings together for those for meetings where an in-person one is not necessarily appropriate. At least we would get to meet some of the people in person and not all.
Now, in the
Definitely
early days of,
happy to host if you all travel north. But I think I might be in the minority here. I'm not sure if anybody else is from the county on this call today or on the board. So, Bangor, love it when I can just go to Bangor. That's a hop, skip, and a jump.
Matt, you were reminding me, I feel like in the dawn of, what we used to call video conferencing, people couldn't do it just from their desks. So the model was people would sort of gather in rooms, like often at universities, and then they'd all get linked together that way. Haven't done one of those in a while. Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
I would just ask, I know that Jody and Craig will appreciate this. You have had some challenges scheduling meetings in spaces that are large enough to accommodate the people that need to be in the room. Sorry, Jody, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I don't think it's your fault. But I think that that is something that's important too, if we're going to all be in the same space, to make sure that it can accommodate everyone that needs to be there, and has all of the things that we need. So I know that you know that, but I just wanted to put it out there as needs to be prioritized.
Mhm.
Yeah, go
Um,
ahead, Jody.
Well, one thought is, and if there's more feedback, that's great. Don't want to preempt that. But one thought is that we come back with a possible layout that accounts for all of these suggestions, that tries to, that looks at either 2 or 3 meetings in person, that disperses those meetings across the state, that has all of the other ones on Zoom, that accounts for the fact that maybe the focus group would be best in person, and that we sort of come back with a proposal that you could tweak at the March 26th meeting. Yeah, so if that would be helpful, we can do that. So you have something to react, something specific to react to. Okay, great.
So, and this may be true for at least one more meeting before these become more interactive, but I know a lot of people have been on the meeting for the whole, 80 minutes at this point and may not have said anything. So just want to make some space. Don't want to put anybody at the spot, but Jay and Jeff and Jameson and any Muhidin, but Nick, anybody, Nicholas, anybody who has not weighed in would like, got something they'd like to say?
I can say something. I agree with everyone else. I think that it's good to have the Zoom meetings, but I also think it's very important to have at least 2 or 3 in-person meetings. It's very difficult in a group setting on Zoom to get to know who you're working with. So when you're in person, you can have side conversations and you actually get to know the people you're working with. So I think it's an important thing. And a lot of the boards that I work with, they all have the same sort of format where they have 2 in-person meetings, and it's not always in the same location. It is spread out around the state.
I think I agree with Jay. We can have in person, discuss around the state, so that people doesn't travel to our area. We can travel to their area too. So on top of that, we can also have some Zoom meetings in place. But in-person meeting is really important for us to like to have the connections.
I do like the spirit of adventure, finding some new places in Maine to meet up that maybe some of us haven't been before.
I'll just throw out one thing that hasn't been mentioned in scheduling. Some of us are active farmers, fisher persons, things like that. Personally, my wife and I have a wild blueberry farm. So if the scheduling can accommodate, for example, I will not be available from mid-July through mid-August, personal or Zoom. But we'll try and work around that sort of thing. But I imagine almost everyone has some kind of peculiarities like that, and that's just one I wanted to call out.
Okay, well, I think I like Jody's suggestion that we take all this back and try to, give you something to shoot at. In the meantime, we do have, and this will be the only, well, I don't know, because we're going to make these decisions, but at this point, this is the only sort of 3-week interval. So hopefully the March 26th meeting is on everybody's calendar. For now, we're going to assume that one will still be on Zoom. And then before then, though, we will, or certainly by then, but possibly even before then, we'll present some other ideas. So if the consensus is to get together in person, people can start getting those on their calendar.
I have to run, everyone. This has been a pleasure, and thank you again for your trust. We will do the best we can going forward. Thank you, Craig, for organizing this, and I'll be in touch with Tricia and the staff at DACF to come up with the future of our work. So thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Hickman.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone. Any closing thoughts here before we close? I really appreciate everybody's time and contributions today. All right. Well, I really thanks everybody. We'll see you in a month, and you'll hear from, or 3 weeks, and you'll hear from us before that. Thanks.
Thank you.